Imagine a world where the lines between protector and predator blur into a singular chilling reality. It is the year 1962, and the height of the Cold War has pushed the globe to the very brink of nuclear annihilation. Deep within the windowless offices of the Pentagon, a group of high-ranking military officials is gathering to discuss a plan so sinister that it defies everything the American public believes about its own government. What if the terror you fear most was not orchestrated by a foreign enemy, but by the very men sworn to defend you? This is not a work of fiction or a dark fantasy born from a novelist's mind. This is the documented history of Operation Northwoods, a proposal that sought to justify a war through the blood of innocent civilians. Can you picture the scene as the Joint Chiefs of Staff lean over top-secret maps while plotting acts of state-sponsored terrorism against their own people? The goal was simple, yet terrifying, to create a wave of public outrage that would force a military invasion of Cuba. How far would government go to manipulate its citizens into supporting a conflict? The answer lies within the declassified pages of a document that remained hidden for nearly 40 years. The tension in the early 1960s was palpable as the shadow of Fidel Castro loomed large over the Caribbean. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion had left the United States military brass humiliated and desperate for a second chance to topple the communist regime. General Lyman Lemnitzer was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he believed that a conventional excuse for war simply would not manifest on its own. He decided that if a reason for war did not exist, then one must be manufactured from thin air. The proposals included a wide array of horrific scenarios designed to shock the national conscience. They suggested blowing up an American ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming the explosion on Cuban forces. Does that sound familiar? It was a direct echo of the sinking of the Maine, which had propelled the nation into war decades earlier. But the architects of Northwoods wanted more than just a sunken ship. They envisioned a campaign of terror that would strike at the heart of American cities. The logistics of these operations were detailed with a cold and mechanical precision that sends shivers down the spine. One specific suggestion involved the orchestration of a fake funeral for mock victims to stir up national grief. They also discussed the possibility of using Russian-Soviet equipment to carry out these attacks to further solidify the narrative of a communist threat. Every detail was considered, from the timing of the explosions to the specific wording of the press releases that would follow. If these historical revelations are challenging your perception of the past, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the world's most guarded secrets. The sheer ruthlessness of the plan is highlighted by a particularly elaborate scheme involving a duplicate aircraft. The military proposed taking a civilian flight and replacing it with a drone painted to look exactly like the original passenger plane. The real passengers would be moved to a secret location while the drone was flown over Cuban airspace and remotely detonated. The world would be told that a plane full of innocent students had been shot down by Castro's fighter jets. How could any nation stand by after such a heartbreaking tragedy? The planners suggested that simulated or even real terrorist attacks could be carried out in Miami and Washington District of Columbia. They spoke of planting bombs in various locations and then framing Cuban agents to ensure a swift and violent public reaction. They even considered the possibility of sinking boats filled with Cuban refugees who were fleeing to American shores. Imagine the optics of such an atrocity being broadcast across the nightly news. The military leaders argued that these casualties were a necessary price to pay for the ultimate goal of removing Castro from power. They viewed the American public not as people, but as a psychological resource to be harvested. The document even suggested that a "Remember the Maine" incident could be arranged to provide a legal and moral cover for a full-scale invasion. The plan was meticulously detailed and ready for execution. It only required a single signature from the President of the United States. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the man who stood between these plans and their horrific realization. When the proposal was presented to him in March 1962, he reportedly rejected it with a sense of profound disbelief. Kennedy was already skeptical of the military leadership after the disaster at the Bay of Pigs, and Operation Northwoods only deepened the divide. He refused to authorize the staged attacks and eventually moved General Lemnitzer out of his position. However, the documents survived in the dark corners of the National Security Archives. It was not until the late 1990s that the public finally saw the proof of what had been discussed behind closed doors. Does this mean that other events in history were also orchestrated by the hands of those in power? The existence of Operation Northwoods serves as a sobering reminder that the unthinkable is sometimes documented in black and white. It forces us to ask, if they were willing to plan it, then who is to say it has never happened? The chilling legacy of these papers remains a cornerstone of modern skepticism. Consider the sheer volume of personnel required to keep such a secret if it had actually moved forward. Hundreds of soldiers and intelligence officers would have been complicit in the murder of their own countrymen. Was the desire to defeat communism so great that it justified the sacrifice of American lives on American soil? The Joint Chiefs of Staff certainly thought so. They argued that the long-term goal of national security outweighed the short-term cost of human life. This utilitarian nightmare is what haunts researchers to this day. We must look at the specific language used in the memos. Words like pretext and justification appear with a cold and clinical frequency. As we reconstruct the timeline of 1962, we see a government at war with its own ethics. The Cuban Missile Crisis would eventually overshadow these dark plans, but the blueprints for deception remained. If Operation Northwoods had been signed into law, the world might look very different today. Would the United States have become a military state under the guise of emergency? Would the trust between the people and the government have shattered decades earlier? The rejection of the plan by Kennedy is often seen as a heroic moment, but it also marked him as an enemy of the military-industrial complex. Some theorists suggest that his refusal to play along with such extreme measures played a role in the events that unfolded in Dallas only a year later. Is it possible that the men who designed Northwoods did not take no for an answer? Scale of the proposed deception reached into every corner of society. They even suggested using the space program as a cover for a false flag operation. If a Mercury mission failed and a famous astronaut died, the plan suggested blaming it on Cuban radio interference. This shows that nothing was sacred to the architects of this conspiracy. They were willing to tarnish the greatest achievements of human exploration to achieve a geopolitical victory. The depth of the depravity within these 19 pages of declassified text is a testament to the dangers of unchecked power. Every time a major event happens today, people look back at Operation Northwoods as proof that the government is capable of the unimaginable. It is the smoking gun that keeps the world of conspiracy theories alive because it is no longer a theory, it is a confirmed historical fact. The military also proposed a wave of Cuban hijackings of civil air and surface craft. They wanted to create a sense of constant fear and vulnerability among the American people. By making the threat feel local and personal, they knew they could bypass the traditional diplomatic channels. They even discussed the idea of attacking a friendly third-party nation like Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago and blaming it on Cuba. This would drag the international community into the conflict and leave Castro with no allies. The strategic brilliance of the plan is matched only by its moral bankruptcy. It was a total war approach that included the psychological destruction of the American psyche. As the sun sets over the monuments of Washington, we are left with a haunting silence. The buildings that house our democracy once held the plans for its betrayal. We must remain vigilant and continue to question the narratives presented to us by those in high places. The story of Operation Northwoods is not just about the past. It is a warning for the future. It tells us that the greatest threats do not always come from across the ocean. Sometimes they are born in the very rooms where we expect to find our safety. The question remains: how many other plans like Northwoods are still sitting in a safe, waiting for their time to be revealed? The truth is often stranger than fiction and far more terrifying. The declassification of these documents in 1997 was a watershed moment for historians. It proved that the concept of a false flag was not a paranoid illusion, but a legitimate military strategy. We are forced to look at every major conflict through a new lens. How many other pretexts were actually carefully scripted plays designed to manipulate the masses? The shadow of Northwoods hangs over the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the lead-up to the Iraq War. It is the ghost that haunts the Pentagon and the CIA. As we finish this journey through the darkest halls of American history, we must ask ourselves, what else are they planning right now? The cycle of power and deception is as old as civilization itself. You must never forget that the only reason we know about Northwoods is because of the relentless work of investigators and the eventual opening of the archives. Without that transparency, this would still be dismissed as a wild conspiracy theory. It serves as a testament to the importance of a free press and the constant demand for accountability. If the people stop asking questions, the people in power stop feeling the need to provide answers. The legacy of the 1962 memos is a call to action for every citizen to remain informed and skeptical. As the credits roll on this reconstruction of the Pentagon's darkest hour, remember that the most dangerous lies are the ones we want to believe. We want to believe our leaders are good and our cause is just. But history tells a different story. It tells a story of ambition and cold calculation. It tells the story of Operation Northwoods.